Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Race to Save the Planet. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and we that dwell therein. This is my environment. My family and I live on this pond in Connecticut. And I always think about that scripture when one of my kids says, "Do we really own this pond? I mean, is this all ours?" Oh, God! While I'm giving this, how can I ever... So we had better all exactly know. So we had better all know exactly what's at stake. So we'd all better know exactly what's at stake. Huge is the world's atmosphere. Oh, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please, look, please join me next time for Race to Save the Planet. And as I'm imparting this, and while I'm imparting this, how am I ever going to... This is my environment. So we'd better all to empathic, probably. All right, let me try it again. Yeah, this episode then is about whether we can learn to coexist with the Earth's other inhabitants. Almost perfect, but not quite. All right. I hope you'll join me next time for Race to Save the Planet.
21.
Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology and I make videos about anything and everything to do with modern society. Today we're going to talk about something, or rather I'm going to talk about something very odd, and I think I'm also doing this for my own benefit rather than for the sake of my audience, because I feel that this is something that I do need to reckon with because of the regrettable reality of the human condition, which is mortality. Mummy issues are generally associated with men or boys and their relationship to their mothers, rather than it being something associated with girls and young women. But I would say that my perception of relationships, and most definitely the perception of myself, relate directly to the mommy issues which I have. I tried to script this, but I'm just going to give up on that venture because this is very, very odd. I risk sounding insane, but I'm willing to take that risk because, you know what, why not? I've got nothing to lose. I've lost everything. The very beginning is probably where my mommy issues inevitably start from. When I was a baby, my brother and I were abandoned by our mother. She was, euphemistically speaking, a woman of the night, an alcoholic, a drug addict, you know. And she took us out one evening, all day, or whatever, who knows. And she just left us on the street and we didn't see her again, or at least I didn't see her again. My brother and I were put into the system, the childcare system, and eventually into fostering. We were separated, however. That's not important. The important thing to remember from that is that from infancy, my mother had actually done that before. She'd abandoned me sort of like a few days after I was born. I have, I suppose, internalized a sense of, oh, nobody wants me. And it doesn't really affect me too much, especially now in my adult years, because I just don't care about anything. But I do think that that definitely stems from that, because nobody's cared about me, therefore why should I care about anything? I wouldn't say that I'm a nihilist, because nihilists tend to have like a need to destroy things. I don't, but I think that's where it first originally started from. Subsequently, I was then fostered and adopted by women. This was a very particular kind of woman. white South African woman. But essentially, I was fostered by a woman and her daughter, Fyodorovna, the elder, and Fyodorovna, the younger, right? Mother and daughter. And so I lived with them, and I was adopted by Fyodorovna, the younger. How this adoption came to be, I have absolutely no idea, because Fyodorovna, the younger, was severely mentally ill. She was in and out of clinics. She was, in euphemistic terms, self-destructive. And I remember a lot of my younger years actually being in direct contact with that. I think one of my earliest memories of actually interacting with Fyodorovna the younger was that I walked into her bedroom, because there was sort of this routine in place in which I would go to school, or I would go and do the Lord's work with Fyodorovna the elder, because she was a very devout individual. After that, we would come back to the apartment in which we lived in, and Fyodorovna the elder would take me to the room of Fyodorovna the younger, and we would go into her room, and 9 times out of 10 she was asleep, because she slept all day and all night. And we'd go there because I would have to say hello and greet her, and so it was a very, very formal interaction. But it was sort of like we'd go to her room and we'd wait and see if she'd wake up or if she was awake. And if she was, it would be great, because then I could go to her, I could hug her and say, hello, how are you? I mean, as I got older, I started to realize that actually this is a bit peculiar. I think this stopped being a routine and a thing that we did, myself and Fyodorovna the elder, that we did once I turned 9. And that was quite a pivotal time. Up until that point, I had been fostered and then adopted by the Fyodorovnas, and so I was very influenced by them. I was particularly influenced by Fyodorovna the elder. Yeah, my adoptive grandmother, I guess. Yes, so she was the one who was effectively raising me, and she was raising me with this vision of being a child of the Lord. And I definitely felt as if I was, particularly because I was constantly told and reminded that I had been saved by them, that I had been rescued from a life of destitution, of being basically a vermin, that I had been rescued, and that this was God's plan, and that God had in store for me great things, and that the way in which I would show that I valued and cherished that was by doing the Lord's work. And that meant, respecting your elders, doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So because everybody had, in my mind and according to them, sacrificed their lives and their everything for me, I was therefore obliged to do the same. And that was all right by me, because I was so devout, so devout. It was very odd because we were in South Africa, and so in South Africa there's a very significant wealth inequality. Relative to the whole country, we were fine, because Fyodorovna the elder, an important factor is that she was raised in Zimbabwe when it wasn't Zimbabwe, when it was called Rhodesia, and was a colony of the British Empire. And her father had made loads of money, basically off land and farming, and they were one of the richest families. But by this point, she'd lost everything. Like, the family had lost everything. If you know anything about Zimbabwe, it's in quite a bad way. And the consequence of that is that all the wealth that was accumulated by colonizers or settlers has also largely been lost if they haven't somehow gotten all their goods and flown the nest. Regrettably, her entire clan didn't, and she ended up in South Africa. She got a car. And I remember I was so thrilled about this car. This car was, I remember it was called a Daihatsu. Oh, I'll put a picture of it. But it was this lilac little box of a car made in China. I was so proud of it. I thought it was incredible. She called it God's taxi, or the Lord's taxi service, and it was incredible. Like, the power which I felt from us getting into this little death trap and driving out into the Hamadulas, or into the South African wilderness, in order to spread the word of the Lord, going into communities, like into impoverished communities, and talking about the Lord and visiting people, and just going to church in like really poor areas, and it was just a really incredible feeling, and I felt so meaningful, and I felt so important and so special. The Lord could do no wrong, and neither could Fyodorovna the Elder. And at 9 years old, things really did change. And I think up until then, I didn't have mommy issues. I didn't really think about my biological mother, whom I hadn't seen, because I was so enamored with this life which I found myself in. I was just so enamored as well with Fyodorovna the Elder. I thought she was incredible, and it was just the most peculiar thing, because she was in her late 50s. She had a sort of a crooked, long nose, let's just put it that way, and that's important to remember. She wasn't exactly like slim, and I don't say that in a derogatory way, because I thought she was just the most beautiful thing on earth. And it's important to say that she wasn't exactly thin, because one thing I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, but one thing that I got really, really excited about and loved doing was cutting her toenails and cleaning in between her toes, because she couldn't reach. Every week I would do that, and I loved doing it. I really did. And even now to this day, I still remember, because I just, for some reason, like if I'm scrolling on YouTube, some advert or some short will come up of people get a weird sort of satisfaction from watching somebody cleaning somebody's toenails, or popping their spots and zits or what have you. And I mean, I don't really get it, but it's sort of whenever I see, like, you know, this toenail that sort of just looks irredeemable, I just think about her and think about how excited I would get when, you know, she would just be lying on her bed. It would be in hot South African summer. She'd have a fan or 3 fans around her, and I would just be sitting at the end of the bed, just cutting her toenails. And obviously I'd always end up cutting some of her skin, and she would just scream. So yes, I was devoted to her, and I think even more so devoted to her because I was so devoted to the Lord, and the Lord meant so much to her. Even though I did not know what the Lord was, even though none of it made any sense to me, the fact that it made sense to her was enough to convince me that God was real, the Lord was real, and that we were the most important human beings to the Lord, and that we could do no wrong, and that we were immortal. Come my 9th birthday, I was so excited. Fyodorovna the Elder was my best friend. I made sure that she would tell me every single day that I was her best friend. And this was very exciting, firstly because it wasn't a film about the rapture or the resurrection or the birth of Christ. So it was Mamma Mia. And at first, I remember so clearly, I was not happy to see this film, because this film, firstly, it had nothing to do with God our Saviour, which was an abomination. And secondly, I didn't know what it was. I haven't watched it for years now, absolute years. But I remember it starts off with Amanda Seyfried and her 2 friends singing Honey Honey, and they're dancing around, and you know, it's great. And then suddenly this woman appeared, and I was gobsmacked. And the reason I was so gobsmacked was because she had the exact same nose as Fyodorovna the Elder. And I remember turning in the cinema and looking at her and saying, like, The nose. Watching the film, there were so many mannerisms of Feodorovna the Elder, which I saw in this woman who'd appeared. And I didn't know who this woman was. Feodorovna the Elder didn't know who this woman was. But it was so strange because this woman who was singing and dancing was just as energetic and enthusiastic about what she was doing on screen as Feodorovna the Elder would be preaching to a group of 6 people trying to deal with poverty and racism in South Africa, you know? So it was very, very interesting to see that, and I was absolutely enthralled. It didn't intrigue me so much as to find out who this person was, but this was also quite a pivotal time because I think it was a few months after my birthday. Feodorovna the Elder, actually, I didn't really understand what was going on at the time, but I gathered that she'd found out something, and a consequence of her finding this out was that she believed that God would heal her with enough prayer, with enough commitment to him, that she would be fine. And so she hadn't done anything about this. What this was breast cancer. She had discovered a lump and she hadn't done anything about it, and she'd been praying and believed that the Lord would help her. Obviously that did not happen, and so it got even worse. Well, I'm sure the majority of my audience is American. I'm sure you can understand this, but in South Africa, healthcare is not universal and it isn't public. So you have to pay for healthcare, and even though she was an heiress of some rich guy from Zimbabwe, she didn't have that money, and so she didn't have healthcare. So nothing could really be done at that point. This was very, very strange for me to deal with, because this woman who was, in my eyes, immortal, who believed herself to be immortal, and who I sort of embodied with this aura of perfection, was suddenly transforming before my eyes to a dramatic extent, an extent which I can't even comprehend even to this day. It's as if it happened overnight. Eventually she went into a hospital and she had surgery, but this wasn't a good hospital. Let's just say it was the hospital that I was, yes, it was the hospital that I was actually born in, which says a lot. So it was, a black hospital where, all the blacks went. At that point, I didn't interact with people of my race. I hadn't interacted with people of my race. Suddenly this woman with just her spirit for life and for living had none of that. Suddenly this woman who was quite overweight, very voluptuous, very busty, suddenly she had no breasts. Suddenly this woman with all this curly graying hair, all of that was gone. And that was very, very peculiar to see, and that did not fit with my worldview. And I don't exactly know what happened, but I think she started to get chemo, and it was basically chemotherapy. At least at this hospital, you had to pay for it, and you had to pay per time you went. And so what happened is that if she could pay, then she'd go and get it. If she couldn't, then, that was just, she couldn't. And I don't necessarily know how it worked, but I know that this affected her very much, and that it had very negative effects. And she essentially went very delusional, and her mind just left. She didn't know who I was. She was vomiting up blood. She couldn't go to the toilet, and she obviously couldn't drive. This all happened in the course of a year, and so that was very, very strange. And then everything just really transformed dramatically, and I was suddenly moving to different homes and different people, all of them women. She was no longer looking after me. And obviously Feodorovna the Younger was, most of the time whilst this was happening, she was in clinics herself. She had carers for her because she was very, very ill. She was not fit to look after herself, let alone to look after me. I found myself not having anyone to truly call my own, in the sense of having somebody maternal whom I felt I could rely on, or who could rely on me, or what have you. And so enter Meryl Streep. If I reflect on it now, I think it was a consequence of her looking so similar facially to Feodorovna the Elder that I just was besotted. And it was this weird way of being able to, I would say, being able to immortalize what was no longer, clearly to me, an immortal human being. And this is why I think that the obsession which began to ensue with Meryl Streep was so psychologically damaging to me in the long term, and is something that definitely does still affect me to this very day. Sort of at this time of my life, I was either in a boarding school or I was living with Feodorovna the Elder, which was very, very odd because we lived in a very, very small little flat, and this flat had one bedroom. And so if Feodorovna the Younger was there and wasn't in a clinic, then it would be all three of us living in this room. Oh, yes. Those are things that I do not want to remember because that was a lot. Sometimes I wouldn't have food because we couldn't, like, who was going to get food? Who was going to get food? Well, thirdly, I would then live with different families. And these were families who inadvertently were headed by women. And I think that this is where my mommy issues really started to take hold, because I would try to find a maternal figure to replace Feodorovna the Elder in all of these women, and inevitably I couldn't, because firstly, we did not look the same. And by this point I was starting to realize that actually there was, even if I didn't feel black, even if I did not relate to my physical appearance, to my ancestry, other people did see me as black. And I also was not, it was more stark and more evident that I was not of their blood. And blood was very important. And inevitably, their children came before me. And that was very difficult to comprehend, because I wanted their attention and their love and to be the center of their world so badly. And also because I obviously felt that, you know, I was so grateful that they were giving me a roof over my head, that they were giving me food, all of that sort of thing, that therefore I had to be better than their children. And so their children were my rivals, if anything, and I had to be better than them. And inevitably, that would fail, because it wasn't about that, was it? No, it wasn't about that, Zandila. Not at all. And so when things would happen, such as one day I would not be able to go back because the social services were not paying them, or Feodorovna the Younger decided to leave the clinic and that she therefore wanted me there, then that relationship would be severed. And that was quite tricky to comprehend and to deal with. In all of this, I found this peculiar sort of solace in cultivating a very intense obsession with Meryl Streep. Nobody my age obviously cared about Meryl Streep. You're not going to find somebody who's like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 saying that their favorite celebrity is a 59-year-old woman. And so I felt that because this was obviously so unique, this was somehow divine intervention of some sort, that I was destined to be Meryl Streep's daughter or granddaughter or whatnot. I don't even know what I saw it as. I do know, however, that it wasn't sexual. I feel that when like young people sort of have like, you know, an attraction to a boy band or something, like there is a bit of a sexual element to it. But then with anything that's kind of sexual, eventually that dies, because, you know, it gets boring and then you move on to the next thing, you know, just human nature. When I fantasized about Meryl Streep, I fantasized about her being my mother. I fantasized us living together with, I think I just imagined her with like Pierce Brosnan, because that was the only time I'd seen her with a man in a film. I fantasized them together and us just living in this home together in this house, your typical all-American family with the black girl. Feodorovna, the elder, was getting sicker and sicker, and she didn't even know who I was. And I remember once I walked into the room that we all shared and she started yelling, and she told me to get out, and the phrase that she used was, she referred to me as the equivalent of like the help. That was a bit difficult to get to terms with. Regrettably, Feodorovna, the elder, passed on, and this was, I think, when my obsession with Meryl Streep got incredibly unhealthy. And it's not that this hadn't been unhealthy before. For instance, I wasn't sure if I was going to share this bit, but I think it matters to the story. A few years before I turned 13, I had been at school, and because everybody knew that I had a bit of a thing for Meryl Streep, they decided to play a trick on me. And, you know, tricks are fine. Like, I personally didn't have really a problem with tricks or whatever. But this one sort of touched a bit close to home, and they pretended that Meryl Streep had died, and I had no way of finding out whether this was true or not. And because so many people were in on this, including adults, I was sure that this had happened. And I mean, nobody meant any harm by it. Like, these people were sort of my friends, and these teachers cared about me, everything. Like, it was all done in good faith. But I don't think inevitably they understood how intense this attachment to Meryl Streep was. I didn't know what I was going to do, and so eventually I found out that, in fact, she was fine. There was no information about an obituary or what have you. And on finding that out, I made a promise to myself. And the promise was that if Meryl Streep goes, I go. And it was sort of like a pact. I even wrote it down in my then journal, which I kept for a long time until I threw it away just before I started at Cambridge, because I decided it was time to turn over a new leaf. But it was written in this journal, which was completely dedicated to anything and everything Meryl Streep, all information that I found out about her, pictures, doodles, everything about her, and including this pact. And this sounds very melodramatic, I know. Given the context, it was for me a coping mechanism, because it was a way of me not being abandoned by the one thing which I felt that I could rely on 100%. The one thing that hadn't abandoned me, which was this fantastical manifestation of Meryl Streep. And it was a manifestation because I would imagine that she was there with me. I would talk to her. I would see her on a street corner, you know, in my mind, obviously, but I would, you know, she was there with me. She was helping me to navigate the world when I didn't have the guide of a parent to do so. It was a curse and it was a blessing. I think it was a blessing in that I sort of see young people today with their role models being the Kardashians of this world. And I think it was quite a fortuitous curse that mine was this very uncontroversial, politically normal woman who was just, you know, didn't necessarily do anything exciting. I mean, she's just, you know, she's a great actress, but she's sort of, I mean, she's just your average Joe, you know. So, you know, there was no like sort of scandals. There was no me wanting to get a Brazilian butt lift because Meryl Streep has a butt lift or anything. You know, it was very, I didn't have to invest any money, any like yearning for material goods or for an alternative life to have her there with me. I wasn't able to process the demise of Feodorovna the Elder. This was because of this non-realistic relationship that I was having with Meryl Streep. And so when Feodorovna the Elder passed on, I wasn't sad. It wasn't something that it didn't hit me, and it still hasn't hit me. I had Meryl, and so that was enough. That was enough. Sorry, I keep pausing before I say Meryl because I always referred to her as her real name. Meryl Streep is not Meryl Streep's real name. Her real name is Mary Louise Meryl Streep Gummer. So I would always call her Mary. So odd. There's so many like Christian like references to this little story. Very, very, very strange. You know, I was reading a piece about mommy issues and about 7 common traits of daughters who have grown up with unloving mothers. And this article was written by, I kid you not, Peg Streep. It's just, oh, thank goodness I'm not superstitious or spiritual, because my goodness, I could read so much into this. The difficulty of setting boundaries is a very interesting one when it comes to mommy issues, because I think it generally refers to this idea that in future relationships, the daughter will find it difficult to set boundaries between A, herself and her mother, but B, also find it difficult to set boundaries between herself and any partner that she may have, a consequence of this intense obsession that I had with Meryl Streep for so many years of my life. In every relationship that I have had with another human being, I have looked for a mother. And the consequence of that is that I tend to befriend, and I'm drawn to, older white women. I just wanted to be around them, and I just want to be around them. And this is it seems like a fetish or like a preference, but the thing is that there isn't a sexual component to it. And I think why this resonates with me so much now is because recently, like sort of very unexpectedly, I've gotten very close to a woman who I work with, and like she's a white woman in her 50s, and I sort of follow her around like a little lost puppy. And this hasn't happened for a long time because I've been very, very, I think, sort of becoming an adult and sort of realizing that actually nobody cares about me, and that there's no point in me trying to get somebody to care about me because they won't. I'm too old for any woman to want to be my mother. I've sort of come to this sort of reconciliation and this sort of, I think, a place of sort of also not caring. I think that it's got a lot to do with politics and everything else, but sort of on a personal level, this sense of not caring does have something to do with this aspect of my life. It's not even like a conscious thing, it just is how it is. I mean, the number of relationships, maternal relationships that I have had with older white women, and obviously, inevitably, they all fail because obviously, these women are not going to be my mother. And obviously, I become incredibly dependent and incredibly clingy and incredibly like following them around like a little lost puppy. And that's annoying. And, you know, you're a grown woman, like get on with your life. And so, you know, that sort of happens sometimes. And I think I thought that I could sort of get over this in adulthood, because one thing that happened after I left university was that I changed my appearance a bit. So let's just say I started wearing makeup, I started getting my hair done, and I thought that, okay, this is fine because I will obviously get over all the mommy issues this way. And so I make it sound as if I dated so many people, but really it's not even maybe 4, I'd say. I found that inevitably I was always still going back to that wanting and yearning for a mother and a maternal figure. So that was like when I started to realize that actually this is something that really affects you from when you are really, really young, and doesn't just stop when you turn 18 and apparently reach adulthood and become mature and able to deal with the shit of life. It made me really happy, not because I was getting attention just from men, but because it meant that there was a potential that I'd get attention from women, particularly from older women. And I realize now that I wasn't looking at it in a sexual way. I was looking at it in the way of sort of being able to attract a mother to me. So when I went to university, I made a conscious decision to disengage from everything Meryl Streep. And this was going really well. Like, it was fine. Like, I did, and I was very, very successful in that. It didn't feature in my life. And that was like the first time. But a consequence of that was that I was really starting to think about mortality and starting to realize that actually Fyodorovna, the elder, that she's gone. And that was very disconcerting, and I was not ready for that or prepared for that. And after university, when things really started to go a bit downhill, I started to engage a little bit with some Meryl Streep things, like some Meryl Streep films. And it's only very recently that I've decided, no, we cannot do that. We will not do that. Because what I started to realize in engaging with Meryl Streep now, after I stopped for a few years, was that now she's 72 years old, that there are a lot of things that I have not processed, that I have not come to terms with, that I've not rationally come to terms with, that would make me prepared for the realization that this person, who is inevitably quite integral to the fantastical person that I've created for myself, or that I created for myself, is not immortal. And that is very, very, very... oh. And I was watching something on YouTube, and somebody was talking about what made a happy relationship. And I thought, well, what would make a happy relationship for me? And I saw myself, this is going to sound very odd, but I saw myself as being at the deathbed of someone whom I loved. Obviously an older woman, but I was at the end of, or next to this woman, just holding her hand and just making sure that she knew that I was there until she had to go. It seems quite morbid, but for me, knowing that I can be there for someone until the very end, that would sort of provide a lot of closure, I think, with a lot of things. And sort of having that control over situation, or rather that illusion of control over a situation that's inevitable, that is uncontrollable, that for me would signal a good end to something. Not that it makes much sense, but in my mind it does. I don't know if one's mommy issues ever do go away, but I think that it's a good thing that we are potentially able to be a bit more open about it to our potential partners and in our future relationships with people, if it is less stigmatized, because then the other person knows what to expect, they know what to do, they know who you are, they know what they're getting themselves involved in. Fortunately, at this point in my life, I don't care enough about anyone or anything, so there's no worry about that. But I thought it'd be nice to just share this story, just so that you know that I'm fucked up. Are you?